Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the velvet-lined nightmare of medieval court life, where your job description literally includes professional punching bag for royalty. Picture this. You're lying on a straw mattress in a cramped servant's quarters, and outside your tiny window, the first pale fingers of dawn are creeping across the castle walls. The air smells of rushes, wood smoke, and that particular medieval cocktail of unwashed bodies and herbal remedies that somehow passed for hygiene. You're about to experience a day in the life of a whipping boy, a real job that existed in royal courts across Europe, where you take physical punishment whenever the prince misbehaved. And honestly, you probably won't survive this psychologically intact, because imagine explaining to modern HR that your daily duties include absorbing beatings intended for someone else's bratty kid. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little global bedtime community come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wooden bell tower chimes 5 times, echoing across the courtyard like a death knell for your peaceful sleep. You stretch, feeling the familiar ache in your shoulders from yesterday's lesson. Though the lesson wasn't yours, the bruises certainly are. This peculiar profession emerged during the Tudor period, when it became fashionable for royal children to have companion boys of noble birth who would share their education, and more importantly, their punishments. The logic was beautifully twisted. Since it was considered treason to lay hands on a prince, someone else had to absorb the consequences of royal misbehavior. Your bare feet hit the cold stone floor, and you begin the morning ritual that thousands of servants before you have performed. But you're not just any servant, you're a whipping boy, which means you occupy this strange middle ground between companion and scapegoat, friend and sacrifice. The position typically went to boys from minor noble families, creating this fascinating dynamic where you're too highborn to be a common servant, but too expendable to be truly safe. Historians still argue whether the practice was as widespread as popular culture suggests, with some scholars pointing to limited documentary evidence versus the abundance of references in literature and folklore. What's undeniable is that the concept was real enough to appear in official court records, with documented cases of boys like Barnaby Fitzpatrick, who served as whipping boy to the future Edward VI. You pull on your doublet, better quality than a servant's, but not nearly as fine as your royal charges, and prepare to begin another day of educational martyrdom. The irony isn't lost on you that you're probably getting a better education than most noble sons, even if it comes with a side of regular beatings. You'll sit through the same Latin lessons, hear the same philosophy discussions, and learn the same courtly manners. The only difference is that when Prince, whatever his name, decides to act up, you're the one who gets acquainted with the rod. As you lace up your boots, you can hear stirring from the royal chambers next door. The prince is awakening, which means your day of carefully calibrated suffering is about to begin. You've learned to read his moods like a farmer reads weather, a skill that could literally save your skin. Some days he's cooperative, almost apologetic about the system you're both trapped in. Other days, he seems to test the boundaries specifically to watch you pay the price. The peculiar psychology of this arrangement fascinates even as it horrifies. You and the prince are bound together in this weird dance of shared education and separated consequences. He gets the knowledge, you get the bruises, and somehow this was considered an acceptable method of royal child rearing. The theory was that the prince would be so upset by watching his friend suffer that he'd modify his behavior, though judging by historical accounts of royal temperaments, this strategy had mixed results at best. You straighten your shoulders and prepare to step into the corridor, where your day of careful navigation between education and punishment awaits. The morning light streaming through the narrow windows catches the dust motes floating in the air, creating an almost magical atmosphere that belies the harsh realities of your position. It's going to be another long day of learning, loyalty, and quite possibly pain. You step into the corridor where the morning bustle of castle life is already beginning. Servants hurry past carrying water basins and fresh linens, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls in a rhythm that's become as familiar as your own heartbeat. The smell of baking bread wafts up from the kitchens below, mixing with the sharper scents of soap and the herbs used to freshen the rushes scattered across the floors. Your stomach growls, a reminder that breakfast depends entirely on the prince's mood and your ability to keep him from doing anything too spectacularly stupid before the morning meal. The royal chamber door stands slightly ajar, and you can hear the prince's voice inside, already sharp with morning irritation. He's arguing with his valet about something trivial, probably the color of his hose or the way his doublet fits. You've learned that these small frustrations often snowball into larger behavioral issues, and larger behavioral issues mean your back gets better acquainted with whatever implement of correction the tutor favors that week. You knock gently and enter, finding Prince Edward, let's call him Eddie for the sake of our sanity, standing in the middle of his ornate chamber, while two servants fuss over his appearance. The room is a study in medieval luxury. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes cover the walls. A fire crackles in the massive stone fireplace, and the bed could house a small village. Eddie catches sight of you in the mirror, and his expression shifts to something that might be relief, annoyance, or both. Finally, he says, though you're actually precisely on time, these fools can't seem to understand that I want the blue doublet with the silver threading, not the navy with gold. He gestures dramatically at the offending garment. The servants exchange glances. They understand perfectly well, but the blue doublet is being cleaned after yesterday's incident with the wine. But explaining this to Eddie would be pointing out his mistake, and pointing out royal mistakes is exactly the kind of thing that gets you a beating. The morning dressing ritual is an elaborate dance of protocol and practicality. As the prince's companion, you're expected to be dressed appropriately for whatever educational activities lie ahead, but not so grandly that you overshadow your royal charge. It's a delicate balance. You need to look respectable enough to sit in on lessons with visiting dignitaries, but humble enough that everyone remembers your place in the hierarchy. Historians still argue whether whipping boys were truly friends with their princes, or if the relationships were more complex and potentially resentful. The documented correspondence between some whipping boys and their royal charges suggests genuine affection, but there's also evidence of the psychological strain such arrangements created. Imagine trying to maintain a friendship with someone whose mistakes literally cause you physical pain. While Eddie continues his morning tantrum about clothing, you help yourself to the wash basin, scrubbing the sleep from your eyes and preparing for whatever educational torments await. The water is still warm, a luxury that reminds you that despite your unique occupational hazards, you're still living better than most people in the kingdom. It's a strange comfort, knowing that your willingness to be a human punching bag has elevated your station in life. The morning sun streams through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the richly appointed room. You catch your reflection in the polished metal mirror and notice that yesterday's bruise on your cheek has faded to a pale yellow. Small victories. The physical marks heal, but the psychological complexity of your position lingers. You're simultaneously the prince's closest companion and his most visible reminder of consequences he'll never personally face. A soft knock at the door announces the arrival of Master Aldrich, the prince's primary tutor. He's a thin man with sharp eyes and sharper wit, who's developed the particular skill of making education engaging enough to keep Eddie's attention while being prepared to discipline appropriately when things go wrong. His leather satchel contains the day's lessons and, unfortunately, a selection of correctional tools that you've become intimately familiar with. "Good morning, Your Highness," Master Aldrich says with a bow that's respectful, but not obsequious. "I trust you slept well." His eyes flick to you briefly, and you catch the slight tension there. He's already assessing Eddie's mood, calculating the likelihood of educational disruption, and probably wondering if he should have the rod ready, or if today might be one of those miraculous days when royal behavior remains within acceptable bounds. The morning preparation continues with the selection of books and materials for the day's lessons. Eddie will study Latin, mathematics, philosophy, and statecraft, subjects designed to prepare him for eventual rule. You'll sit beside him, absorbing the same knowledge while knowing that any failure on his part to pay attention or behave appropriately will result in physical consequences for you. It's an educational system that would make modern pedagogical theorists weep, but it was considered innovative in its time. As you gather your own materials, a wax tablet for notes, a quill, and a small knife for sharpening, you steel yourself for another day of learning through proxy punishment. The morning light grows stronger, breakfast awaits, and somewhere in the castle, the instruments of correction are being prepared for another day of medieval educational innovation. The great hall buzzes with the controlled chaos of the morning meal as you follow Eddie down the wide stone steps. Servants weave between the long wooden tables, carrying platters of bread, cheese, cold meats, and small ale, the standard breakfast fare that keeps the castle running. The smell of fresh bread mingles with wood smoke from the massive fireplaces, creating an atmosphere that should be comforting, but instead feels charged with potential disaster. You've learned to read the room like a military strategist, identifying potential flashpoints before they explode into situations that end with your back smarting. Eddie takes his place at the high table, elevated above the common dining area where lesser nobles, household staff, and visiting dignitaries break their fast. You sit to his right, close enough to intervene if needed, but positioned to absorb any consequences that might arise from royal breakfast behavior. The morning meal is typically a more relaxed affair than dinner, but relaxed is relative when you're dealing with a teenager who has never faced personal consequences for his actions. The first course arrives, trenchers of bread topped with butter and honey, accompanied by sliced apples and pears from the castle's orchards. Eddie immediately begins complaining about the quality of the honey, loudly enough for the servants to hear. You catch the eye of the head server, a weathered woman named Margaret, who's been managing royal meals since before you were born. Her expression is carefully neutral, but you can see the flash of irritation that she's learned to suppress after decades of service. "This honey tastes like it came from diseased bees," Eddie announces, pushing the trencher away with theatrical disgust. "Surely we can do better than this swill." Several nearby diners glance over, and you feel that familiar knot forming in your stomach. Public criticism of the kitchen staff is exactly the kind of behavior that tutors consider worthy of correction, especially when it demonstrates a lack of appreciation for the castle's resources and the people who provide them. You lean slightly closer to Eddie, keeping your voice low. "Perhaps the honey is different because it's from the autumn harvest," you suggest, trying to offer him an explanation that doesn't cast blame on the kitchen staff. It's a delicate maneuver. You can't directly contradict him, but you can try to redirect his criticism towards something less personal and inflammatory. The social dynamics of medieval dining were incredibly complex, with every gesture and comment carrying weight beyond its surface meaning. A prince's behavior at table was seen as a reflection of his character and future fitness to rule. Public displays of ingratitude or disrespect towards servants were considered serious flaws that needed immediate correction. Unfortunately, that correction would be administered to you rather than the actual perpetrator. Eddie ignores your diplomatic suggestion and continues his critique, now focusing on the texture of the bread and the temperature of the small ale. You notice Master Aldrich approaching from across the hall, his expression already shifting into that particular look of scholarly disappointment that usually precedes educational consequences. The morning sunlight streaming through the hall's high windows suddenly feels less warm and more like the lighting in a courtroom. Historians still argue whether the elaborate court protocols around dining were primarily about maintaining social order, or if they served deeper psychological functions in establishing royal authority. What's clear is that meal times were considered crucial opportunities for character development and behavioral correction. The communal nature of dining made it a natural classroom for lessons in leadership, courtesy, and social awareness. As if sensing the approaching storm, Eddie doubles down on his complaints, now questioning the competence of the entire kitchen staff. How difficult can it be to prepare a simple breakfast? Even the poorest villages can manage better than this. The comment carries across the hall, reaching the ears of several kitchen servants who have worked since before dawn to prepare the meal. You see Margaret's jaw tighten, and you know that this particular display of royal ingratitude will not go unreported. Master Aldrich reaches the high table just as Eddie launches into a detailed critique of the apple slices, claiming they're cut too thick and poorly arranged. The tutor's arrival shifts the entire dynamic of the meal, and you feel that familiar mixture of dread and resignation that comes with knowing you're about to pay for someone else's poor choices. The irony isn't lost on you that you're probably more grateful for the castle's food than Eddie has ever been, despite the fact that you're about to be punished for his ingratitude. The breakfast continues with this undercurrent of tension as other diners try to focus on their meals while surreptitiously watching the drama unfold at the high table. You manage to eat a few bites of bread and honey, which actually tastes perfectly fine, while mentally preparing for whatever educational intervention Master Aldrich has planned. The honey is sweet on your tongue, a small pleasure that you savor knowing it might be the last pleasant sensation you experience for a while. Eddie's complaints eventually wind down, but the damage is done. The morning meal has become a lesson in royal behavior, with you cast in the role of unwilling teaching assistant. As the dishes are cleared and the hall begins to empty, you catch Master Aldrich's eye and see the slight nod that confirms your suspicions. The morning's education is about to begin, and it's going to involve more than just Latin and mathematics. The solar designated for Eddie's education occupies the castle's most prestigious tower, with tall windows that flood the circular room with natural light. Thick carpets cover the stone floor, and the walls are lined with shelves holding books, scrolls, and various educational instruments. A large oak table dominates the center of the space, surrounded by comfortable chairs that represent a level of luxury most scholars could only dream of. You take your customary seat beside Eddie, close enough to share materials, but positioned where Master Aldrich can easily access you when disciplinary measures become necessary. The morning's lesson begins with Latin translation, a subject that Eddie approaches with the enthusiasm of someone asked to voluntarily contract plague. Master Aldrich has selected a passage from Cicero about civic duty and leadership, not coincidentally, given the breakfast performance. The text discusses the responsibilities of those born to privilege and the importance of treating subjects with respect and consideration. Every word feels loaded with meaning as Eddie stumbles through the translation, his pronunciation making Latin sound like a completely different language. Princeps populi servus esse debet, Master Aldrich reads, his voice carrying the weight of scholarly authority. The prince should be the servant of the people. He looks meaningfully at Eddie, who's currently using his stylus to carve inappropriate drawings into the wax tablet instead of taking notes. Can you explain what Cicero means by this seemingly contradictory statement? Your Highness. Eddie glances up from his artistic endeavors, which appear to be anatomically questionable representations of farm animals and shrugs. It means princes should tell people what to do, obviously. If you're serving someone, you're in charge of them. The interpretation is so spectacularly wrong that you can practically hear Master Aldrich's patience cracking like ice on a pond. The classroom dynamics of royal education were fascinating from a pedagogical perspective, combining the challenges of teaching privileged students with the added complexity of political implications. Every lesson carried weight beyond mere academic achievement, as the prince's education would directly impact his future subjects. The pressure on tutors was immense. They needed to instill wisdom and virtue while navigating the delicate politics of correcting someone who would eventually hold power over their lives. "I'm afraid that's not quite correct," Master Aldrich says, with the careful diplomacy of someone who's learned to criticize royalty without appearing to criticize royalty. Perhaps, if we examine the context more carefully, he begins to explain the philosophical concept of servant leadership. But Eddie has already returned to his artistic pursuits, now adding what might be wings to his questionable livestock. You lean forward slightly, genuinely interested in the discussion despite the circumstances. The concept of leadership through service resonates with your own situation. You're serving Eddie by absorbing his punishments, but there's a twisted power dynamic at play. Your service enables his worst behaviors while protecting him from their consequences. It's a philosophical puzzle that Cicero probably never contemplated. The wise ruler understands that true power comes from earning the respect and loyalty of those he governs. Master Aldrich continues, his eyes flicking between Eddie's continued doodling and your attentive posture. A prince who treats his subjects with contempt. He pauses meaningfully, and you know the morning's breakfast display is about to become a teachable moment. Historians still argue whether the classical education provided to medieval royalty actually improved their leadership capabilities, or simply gave them more sophisticated ways to justify their actions. The curriculum was certainly impressive by contemporary standards, covering rhetoric, philosophy, mathematics, and statecraft. But the lack of personal consequences for poor behavior may have undermined the moral lessons embedded in classical texts. Eddie suddenly looks up from his tablet, apparently having achieved artistic satisfaction with his winged livestock. "Are we done with the boring Roman stuff yet? I thought we were going to study warfare today." His tone carries the particular brand of entitled impatience that you've learned to recognize as a warning signal. Master Aldrich's jaw tightens, almost imperceptibly. "We will proceed to military history after we complete our examination of civic responsibility," the tutor replies, his voice carrying subtle steel. "However, I believe this morning's breakfast conversation demonstrates that some additional instruction in courtesy and gratitude might be beneficial first." The words hang in the air like a judicial sentence, and you feel your shoulders unconsciously tense. The solar's peaceful atmosphere suddenly feels charged with anticipation. Sunlight streams through the windows, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air like tiny witnesses to the educational drama about to unfold. You can hear birds singing in the courtyard below, their cheerful songs providing an ironically cheerful soundtrack to your impending discomfort. Eddie's expression shifts from bored to annoyed as he realizes the morning's breakfast behavior is about to have consequences. "What does breakfast have to do with Latin?" he demands, his voice rising with the particular petulance of someone who's never had to face the results of his own actions. Master Aldrich stands slowly, moving toward the cabinet where he keeps his educational implements. "Everything, Your Highness," he says quietly, selecting a thin birch rod with the practiced motion of someone who's performed this routine many times before. Leadership begins with character, and character is revealed in how we treat those who serve us. He turns to face you, his expression mixing regret with professional duty. "I believe some practical demonstration of consequences might be educational for both of you." The birch rod catches the morning light as Master Aldrich tests its flexibility with a gentle flick of his wrist. The sound it makes cutting through the air is soft but unmistakable, a whisper of promised pain that sends a familiar chill down your spine. You've been through this routine enough times to know exactly what comes next, but the anticipation never gets easier. If anything, the psychological buildup is almost worse than the physical reality, though that's probably small comfort to your soon-to-be smarting back. "Stand up, please," Master Aldrich says, his voice carrying the tone of someone who's learned to make violence sound educational. You rise from your chair with as much dignity as you can manage, keenly aware that Eddie is watching the proceedings with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly entertaining performance. The irony that he's about to receive a vicarious education in consequences, while you receive a very direct one, is not lost on you. The protocol for whipping boy punishments was surprisingly formalized, with specific procedures designed to maximize the educational impact while minimizing the risk of permanent injury. The number of strokes, the force applied, and even the location of the beating were all carefully calculated to create sufficient discomfort without causing lasting damage. It was discipline as theater, with you playing the unwilling star in a performance designed to teach someone else a lesson. "Remove your doublet," Master Aldrich instructs, and you comply with the practiced efficiency of someone who's performed this routine far too many times. The morning air feels cool against your shirt, and you can hear the birds still singing in the courtyard below, their cheerful songs providing an surreal contrast to the classroom discipline about to unfold. You fold your doublet carefully and place it on your chair, maintaining as much dignity as possible under the circumstances. Eddie shifts in his seat, his expression a mixture of curiosity and something that might be guilt, though with royal children, it's often hard to distinguish genuine remorse from simple discomfort at witnessing consequences they've caused. "Is this really necessary?" he asks, though his tone suggests he's more interested in the spectacle than concerned about your welfare. Master Aldrich pauses in his preparations to address the question seriously. "Your behavior at breakfast this morning showed disrespect to the castle staff and ingratitude for the provisions they work hard to provide. The tutor explains, his voice taking on the cadence of someone delivering a formal lecture. Such behavior is unbecoming of a future leader and requires correction. Since divine law prevents us from disciplining you directly, your companion will receive the consequences intended to remind you of proper conduct. The theological justification for whipping boys was rooted in medieval concepts of divine right and the sacred nature of royal persons. Since princes were considered to rule by God's appointment, physically punishing them was seen as tantamount to striking God's representative on earth. The compromise solution of proxy punishment satisfied both the need for discipline and the requirements of royal dignity, though it created its own moral and psychological complexities. Historians still argue whether the practice actually modified royal behavior or simply created elaborate justifications for allowing privileged children to avoid consequences. Some evidence suggests that princes who developed genuine affection for their whipping boys did moderate their behavior to protect their friends, while others seemed to treat the arrangement as simply another form of entertainment. You position yourself as instructed, gripping the edge of the oak table and trying to find that mental space where you can disconnect from what's about to happen. The wood is smooth and warm under your hands, polished by years of scholarly use. You focus on the grain patterns, the way the morning light plays across the surface, anything to distract from the anticipation that's making your muscles tense despite your best efforts to relax. 6 strokes, Master Aldrich announces, for public criticism of the kitchen staff, demonstration of ingratitude, and failure to show proper appreciation for those who serve. The formal pronouncement turns your punishment into an educational exercise, complete with explicit reasoning designed to help Eddie understand the connection between his behavior and these consequences. Whether he's actually learning anything is debatable, but the pedagogical framework is impressive in its thoroughness. The first stroke lands with a sharp crack that echoes off the stone walls, followed immediately by the burning sensation that spreads across your back like liquid fire. You bite back any sound, determined not to give Eddie the satisfaction of seeing you cry out. The pain is sharp and immediate, but manageable. Master Aldrich has calibrated his force to create sufficient discomfort without causing injury that would interfere with tomorrow's lessons. Note the connection between actions and consequences, Master Aldrich says between strokes, turning your punishment into a live demonstration of cause and effect. Leadership requires understanding that our behavior affects others, often in ways we don't immediately see. The second stroke lands, and you focus on breathing steadily, maintaining your composure despite the burning sensation spreading across your shoulders. The remaining strokes follow in measured intervals, each one accompanied by educational commentary that transforms your physical discomfort into a philosophical lesson about responsibility and leadership. By the time Master Aldrich announces 6, your back feels like it's been branded with lines of fire, but you've maintained your dignity throughout the ordeal. You straighten slowly, reaching for your doublet, while trying not to show how much the movement aggravates your tender back. Eddie watches you dress with an expression that's difficult to read, part fascination, part discomfort, and perhaps a trace of something that might be genuine concern. "Does it hurt much?" he asks, his voice carrying a note of curiosity that makes you wonder if he's ever really considered the physical reality of your position. You meet his eyes as you settle your doublet over your burning shoulders, choosing your words carefully. "It serves its purpose, Your Highness," you reply. The diplomatic non-answer that you've learned keeps everyone happy while revealing nothing about your actual feelings. Master Aldrich nods approvingly at your response, and you return to your seat beside Eddie, ready to continue the morning's Latin lesson as if nothing unusual has occurred. The afternoon sun slants through the castle's tall windows as you follow Eddie from the solar to the armory, where Sir Marcus awaits with an assortment of blunted weapons and protective gear. The transition from academic to physical education provides a welcome relief from the morning's tensions, though your back still throbs with each step, a persistent reminder of the breakfast lesson. The armory smells of oil, leather, and metal, scents that speak of preparation for violence, though the violence here is carefully controlled and educational rather than deadly. Eddie's mood has improved dramatically since leaving the classroom, and he practically bounces with excitement as he examines the practice swords arranged on the weapon rack. Physical training appeals to him in ways that Latin never will, probably because it involves hitting things rather than thinking about them. You're grateful for his enthusiasm, since happy princes tend to behave better, and better behavior means fewer opportunities for you to become intimately acquainted with educational correction. Today we'll focus on basic sword work and shield techniques, Sir Marcus announces, his voice carrying the authority of someone who's actually used these weapons in real combat rather than just academic exercises. He's a grizzled veteran with scars that tell stories of real battles, which automatically commands more respect from Eddie than scholarly pursuits ever could. Fighting is not just about strength. It requires discipline, strategy, and respect for your opponent. The martial education of medieval princes was considered essential preparation for their future roles as military leaders and defenders of the realm. Unlike the academic subjects that Eddie approaches with royal indifference, weapons training carried immediate practical relevance. A prince who couldn't fight effectively would struggle to command respect from his knights and nobles, making military instruction a crucial component of royal education. Sir Marcus begins with basic stance and grip, demonstrating the proper way to hold a sword without telegraphing your intentions to an opponent. Eddie proves surprisingly attentive, following instructions with the focused concentration that's been notably absent from his morning lessons. You mirror his movements, grateful for the opportunity to learn skills that might actually prove useful in your uncertain future. The afternoon session progresses through various drills designed to build muscle memory and spatial awareness. You and Eddie work in pairs, practicing attacks and defenses under Sir Marcus's watchful eye. The physical activity feels good after the morning's static classroom time, and you find yourself genuinely enjoying the challenge of mastering these new skills. The burning sensation in your back gradually fades to a manageable ache as your muscles warm up with exercise. Remember, Sir Marcus calls out as you and Eddie engage in a controlled sparring match. A knight's greatest weapon is his mind, not his sword. Think 3 moves ahead, anticipate your opponent's strategy, and never let anger cloud your judgment. The advice carries implications beyond swordplay. The same principles apply to navigating court politics and managing the complex relationships that define castle life. Historians still argue whether the elaborate martial training provided to medieval nobility actually prepared them for real combat, or simply reinforced social hierarchies through ritualized violence. The techniques taught in castle courtyards were certainly effective, but the controlled environment of training could never fully replicate the chaos and brutality of actual warfare. Still, the discipline and strategic thinking required for effective swordplay provided valuable life skills. Eddie proves surprisingly skilled with the practice sword. His natural athleticism and competitive spirit serving him well in this arena. You match his enthusiasm, finding that you actually enjoy the physical challenge and the straightforward nature of the competition. Unlike the complex social navigation required in other aspects of castle life, sword work offers clear rules and immediate feedback. You either block successfully or you don't. The training session includes instruction in various weapons beyond the basic sword and shield. Sir Marcus demonstrates the proper use of daggers, maces, and polearms, explaining the tactical advantages and disadvantages of each weapon type. Eddie absorbs this information with the focused attention that his academic tutors would envy, proving that he's capable of serious study when the subject matter captures his interest. As the afternoon progresses, you notice that the physical activity and Eddie's obvious enjoyment of the training have created a more relaxed atmosphere between you. The shared challenge of mastering new skills has temporarily dissolved some of the artificial barriers created by your respective roles. For these few hours, you're simply 2 young men learning to fight, rather than prince and whipping boy locked in your strange dance of privilege and consequence. Sir Marcus concludes the session with a demonstration of advanced techniques, his movements fluid and precise despite his age. Remember that weapons training is not about becoming a warrior, he says, cleaning his practiced sword with practiced motions. It's about developing the discipline, strategic thinking, and respect for others that will serve you well in all aspects of leadership. A prince who understands combat will better appreciate the sacrifices made by those who serve under him. The afternoon's activities end with equipment maintenance, cleaning and storing the practice weapons, checking the condition of protective gear, and preparing the armory for the next day's training. Eddie approaches these mundane tasks with less enthusiasm than the actual fighting, but he follows through without complaint, perhaps recognizing that responsibility for equipment is part of the broader lesson about leadership and accountability. As you help organize the weapon rack, you catch Sir Marcus observing you with an expression that suggests he understands more about your situation than he's letting on. His slight nod of approval for your performance today feels like recognition of your unique position, not quite servant, not quite noble, but someone trying to make the best of an impossible situation with dignity intact. The great hall fills with the controlled chaos of the afternoon assembly, where various petitioners, visiting dignitaries, and minor nobles gather to conduct business with the castle's administration. You follow Eddie through the crowd, both of you dressed in your finest afternoon attire, his significantly finer than yours, naturally, as he prepares to observe the practical application of governance. The air buzzes with conversation in multiple languages, the rustle of expensive fabrics, and the underlying tension that accompanies any gathering where power and influence are being negotiated. Eddie takes his position on the dais beside his father's empty throne, while you stand slightly behind and to the right, close enough to be summoned if needed, but positioned to clearly indicate your subordinate status. The arrangement is a masterpiece of medieval social engineering, with every person's location in the hall precisely calculated to reflect their position in the complex hierarchy that governs castle life. You've learned to read these spatial relationships like a map of power, understanding exactly where you belong and why. The first petitioner approaches, a merchant requesting permission to establish a new trade route through the prince's lands. Eddie listens with the practiced attention of someone who's been trained to appear interested even when bored, occasionally nodding or asking questions that demonstrate his understanding of the economic implications. You find yourself genuinely fascinated by the negotiations, recognizing that these decisions will affect thousands of people's lives and livelihoods. The proposed route would increase tax revenue by approximately 15%, the merchant explains, unrolling a map that shows the planned road improvements. However, it would require cooperation from Lord Aldwin's territory, and he's been resistant to previous collaboration efforts. The political complexity of the situation becomes immediately apparent. This isn't just about roads and trade, but about navigating the intricate web of relationships between neighboring nobles. Eddie's response reveals both his education and his limitations. He demonstrates solid understanding of the economic principles involved, but his questions show a concerning lack of awareness about the human impact of policy decisions. If Lord Aldwin refuses to cooperate, can't we simply compel his participation? He asks, as if complex diplomatic relationships could be resolved through simple assertion of authority. The merchant's careful expression suggests he's encountered this type of noble thinking before. Your Highness raises an important point about authority, he says diplomatically, but Lord Aldwin's cooperation would be more valuable if offered freely rather than demanded. Perhaps there are incentives we could offer that would make participation attractive to him. The suggestion is a masterclass in managing entitled nobility while advancing practical goals. Historians still argue whether the medieval emphasis on hierarchical relationships actually facilitated effective governance, or simply created elaborate justifications for existing power structures. The system certainly provided stability and clear chains of command, but it also insulated rulers from the consequences of their decisions and limited their understanding of how policies affected ordinary people. As the afternoon progresses, you observe a fascinating parade of human ambition and political maneuvering. Minor nobles present grievances against their neighbors, merchants seek favorable trading terms, and various officials report on the implementation of previous decisions. Each interaction reveals different aspects of the complex system that keeps the kingdom functioning, though you begin to notice patterns that suggest the system serves some interests better than others. Eddie's performance as an observer is competent, but reveals the gaps in his education that purely academic instruction cannot fill. He understands the theoretical frameworks of governance, but lacks practical experience with the human realities of power. His questions tend to focus on technical details rather than the broader implications of policy decisions, suggesting that his education has emphasized process over principles. The granary reports indicate that the harvest was adequate but not exceptional, announces the castle's steward, his weathered face showing the strain of managing resources through another challenging year. We have sufficient stores for the winter, but little surplus for emergencies or trade. Eddie nods thoughtfully, but you notice he doesn't ask about the human cost of adequate but not exceptional, the families who might go hungry if the stores run low, or the difficult decisions that stewards must make when resources are limited. A commotion near the hall's entrance draws your attention to the arrival of Lady Catherine, a minor noble whose lands border the castle's territory. She's accompanied by a small retinue and carries herself with the particular brand of dignified frustration that suggests she's here to complain about something significant. Eddie straightens in his chair, recognizing that this audience will require more diplomatic skill than the routine business that preceded it. "Your Highness," Lady Catherine says, offering a curtsy that's respectful but not obsequious, "I come seeking justice regarding the treatment of my people by your father's tax collectors. The assessment imposed last month exceeds what my lands can reasonably support, and the collection methods employed have been aggressive." Her carefully chosen words carry implications that make you uncomfortable. Tax collection disputes have a way of escalating into violence. Eddie's response reveals both his youth and his sheltered upbringing. "Surely the assessments are based on established formulas?" he asks, as if mathematical precision could resolve the human complexities of taxation. "The Crown's needs must be met, and each territory contributes according to its capacity." The textbook answer demonstrates his academic training while completely missing the emotional and practical realities of Lady Catherine's situation. The tension in the hall shifts as Lady Catherine's diplomatic composure slips slightly. "The formulas may be established, Your Highness, but they don't account for the crop failures we experienced this spring or the livestock disease that decimated our herds. My people are already struggling to survive, and the tax collectors show no interest in adjusting their demands to reflect our actual circumstances." Her voice carries the weight of someone who's watched her subjects suffer, while distant authorities demand impossible payments. find yourself torn between admiration for Lady Catherine's courage in challenging royal policy and concern about how Eddie will respond to what amounts to direct criticism of his father's administration. The afternoon's lessons in social hierarchy suddenly feel less abstract and more personally relevant. Your position as whipping boy means that Eddie's diplomatic failures could have immediate physical consequences for you. The exchange continues with Eddie demonstrating his theoretical knowledge of taxation policy while remaining completely oblivious to the human suffering that Lady Catherine describes. His responses are technically correct, but emotionally tone-deaf, suggesting that his education has prepared him to administer the system without understanding its impact on real people. The gap between royal education and practical governance becomes painfully apparent as the conversation progresses. Perhaps you find yourself thinking, but not daring to say, the solution isn't to defend the system, but to understand why it's failing the people it's supposed to serve. The thought feels dangerous, even in the privacy of your own mind. But the afternoon's observations have highlighted the limitations of an education that emphasizes technical competence over human empathy. As Lady Catherine's audience concludes with polite but unsatisfying diplomatic language, you notice Master Aldrich observing from the side of the hall. His expression suggests he's been evaluating Eddie's performance and finding it wanting. The slight tightening around his eyes carries the particular look of educational disappointment that usually precedes corrective action, and you feel your recently healed back begin to tense in anticipation. The solar feels different in the evening light, shadows stretching across the floor as candles supplement the fading daylight filtering through the tall windows. You settle into your familiar chair beside Eddie, trying to ignore the way your afternoon observations have shifted your perspective on the lessons you're about to receive. Master Aldrich arranges his materials with the methodical precision of someone who's spent years perfecting the art of royal education, though his expression suggests that today's instruction will address more than just academic subjects. This afternoon's assembly provided excellent opportunities for observing governance in practice. Master Aldrich begins, his tone carrying the weight of someone who's witnessed every diplomatic misstep and missed opportunity. However, I noticed some gaps between theoretical knowledge and practical application that require attention. The carefully neutral language doesn't disguise the fact that Eddie's performance was less than stellar, and you feel that familiar knot forming in your stomach. Eddie shifts uncomfortably in his chair, perhaps sensing that his afternoon's work is about to be subjected to scholarly analysis. Lady Catherine seemed satisfied with our discussion, he says defensively, though even he doesn't sound entirely convinced by his own assessment. The taxation issues she raised were properly addressed through established procedures. The response demonstrates his ability to recite policy while completely missing the human dimension of the problem. Let us examine that interaction more closely, Master Aldrich suggests, pulling out a scroll covered with notes he's taken during the afternoon's proceedings. Lady Catherine reported that her people are struggling to meet tax obligations due to crop failures, and livestock disease. How might a wise ruler respond to such circumstances? The question is designed to guide Eddie toward recognizing the broader implications of his afternoon's performance. The evening lesson transforms into a detailed analysis of leadership, empathy, and the responsibilities of power. Master Aldrich systematically dissects Eddie's responses to various petitioners, highlighting missed opportunities for demonstrating compassion and understanding. The academic exercise reveals the gap between knowing the rules of governance and understanding their human impact, a distinction that apparently requires more attention than previous lessons have provided. A prince's primary responsibility is to ensure the welfare of his subjects, Master Aldrich explains, his voice taking on the cadence of someone delivering fundamental principles. This requires not just knowledge of policy and procedure, but genuine concern for the people affected by those policies. Technical competence without empathy produces tyranny, while empathy without competence produces chaos. The lesson resonates with your own observations from the afternoon assembly. Eddie's response reveals both his intellectual understanding and his emotional limitations. But surely maintaining order and collecting necessary revenue takes priority over individual hardships, he asks, as if governance were a mathematical equation rather than a human endeavor. The kingdom's needs must come before personal concerns. The response demonstrates exactly the kind of thinking that Master Aldrich is trying to correct. Historians still argue whether medieval education actually prepared rulers for the psychological and emotional demands of leadership, or if it simply provided intellectual frameworks for justifying predetermined policies. The emphasis on classical texts and theoretical principles may have created learned tyrants rather than wise rulers, particularly when educational systems insulated princes from the consequences of their decisions. Consider the long-term implications of your approach, Master Aldrich continues, his patience showing signs of strain. A ruler who ignores his subjects, suffering may maintain short-term stability, but he also creates the conditions for rebellion, economic collapse, and social unrest. Lady Catherine's concerns represent more than individual hardship. They signal systemic problems that require thoughtful response. The lesson is becoming more pointed, and you sense that consequences are approaching. The evening's instruction continues with examples drawn from historical rulers who failed to balance authority with compassion. Master Aldrich recounts the stories of kings who lost their thrones through excessive taxation, princes who sparked rebellions through callous policies, and dynasties that collapsed because they forgot that governance requires the consent of the governed. Each example is carefully chosen to illustrate the practical importance of the empathy that Eddie seems to lack. Your responses this afternoon demonstrated technical knowledge, but showed concerning insensitivity to human suffering, Master Aldrich says, his voice taking on the formal tone that usually precedes disciplinary action. A future ruler who cannot recognize or respond to his subjects' pain will not rule effectively or for long. This represents a serious gap in your education that requires immediate attention. Eddie's expression shifts from defensive to annoyed, as he realizes that his afternoon's performance is being criticized. I followed proper procedures and gave appropriate responses, he insists, his voice rising with the particular petulance that you've learned to recognize as a warning sign. Lady Catherine's problems are not my fault, and I'm not responsible for fixing every hardship in the kingdom. The response reveals exactly the kind of attitude that Master Aldrich is trying to correct. The solar's peaceful atmosphere suddenly feels charged with tension as Master Aldrich's expression hardens. Your attitude demonstrates precisely the problem we need to address, he says quietly, moving toward the cabinet where he keeps his educational implements. A prince who refuses to accept responsibility for his subjects' welfare has learned nothing from his education. The evening's lesson is about to become very practical and very personal. You watch Master Aldrich select a leather strap from his collection, testing its flexibility with the practiced motion of someone who's performed this routine many times before. The sight sends a familiar chill through your recently healed back, and you steel yourself for another round of educational consequences. Eddie's insensitivity to human suffering is about to become your physical reality, creating a perfect example of the disconnect between actions and consequences that characterizes your entire existence. 10 strokes, Master Aldrich announces, for demonstrated lack of empathy, failure to recognize the human impact of policy decisions, and refusal to accept responsibility for subjects' welfare. The formal pronouncement transforms Eddie's character flaws into a specific curriculum that will be written across your back in lines of fire. The evening's lesson is about to become unforgettably personal. The great hall buzzes with the evening's grandest meal as you take your place beside Eddie at the high table, your back still smarting from the afternoon's empathy lesson. The dinner service represents medieval hospitality at its most elaborate, with multiple courses designed to demonstrate the castle's wealth and sophistication. Servants weave between tables, carrying platters of roasted meats, elaborate pastries, and delicacies that speak of extensive trade networks and skilled kitchen staff. The atmosphere should be festive, but you've learned to read Eddie's moods well enough to sense trouble brewing beneath the surface pageantry. The first course arrives with appropriate ceremony. A whole roasted peacock, its feathers artistically restored, and its body stuffed with fragrant herbs and spices. The presentation is a masterpiece of medieval culinary art, designed to impress visiting dignitaries and reinforce the castle's reputation for sophisticated entertainment. Eddie examines the dish with the critical eye of someone who's been raised to expect perfection, and you can already see the signs of royal dissatisfaction forming. The seasoning seems excessive, Eddie announces, loud enough for the servers to hear clearly, and the presentation lacks the refinement I've seen in other courts. His criticism carries across the hall, reaching the ears of the kitchen staff who have worked for hours to prepare this elaborate meal. You catch the expression of the head cook, a master craftsman who's devoted his career to perfecting the art of royal dining, and see the flash of hurt that he quickly suppresses. The dinner conversation turns to the day's events, with various nobles sharing observations about the afternoon's assembly and the evening's lessons. Eddie contributes his own commentary, displaying the kind of casual disregard for others' feelings that you've learned to recognize as dangerous. He criticizes Lady Catherine's concerns as excessive dramatics, dismisses the merchant's trade proposals as poorly conceived, and generally demonstrates the exact attitude that Master Aldrich spent the evening trying to correct. Perhaps, suggests Lord Aldwyn, an elderly noble with decades of court experience, the challenges facing our territories require more collaborative approaches than traditional methods have provided. His diplomatic language offers Eddie an opportunity to demonstrate growth and understanding, but the suggestion seems to trigger the prince's defensive instincts rather than his intellectual curiosity. Eddie's response reveals both his academic knowledge and his emotional immaturity. Traditional methods exist because they work, he declares, his voice carrying the confident ignorance of someone who's never personally experienced the consequences of failed policies. Innovation for its own sake creates instability and confusion. The established systems serve the kingdom's needs effectively. The response demonstrates his ability to recite conservative principles while completely missing their practical limitations. The social dynamics of medieval dining were designed to reinforce hierarchical relationships while providing opportunities for informal diplomacy and relationship building. The shared meal created a controlled environment where different social groups could interact according to established protocols. Though the success of these interactions depended heavily on the participants' social skills and emotional intelligence. Eddie's performance suggests that his education has emphasized protocol over genuine relationship building. As the meal progresses through multiple courses, Eddie's commentary becomes increasingly critical and less diplomatic. He complains about the wine's vintage, questions the quality of the bread, and makes dismissive comments about the musical entertainment provided between courses. Each criticism demonstrates his inability to appreciate the effort and skill required to create the elaborate dining experience he's been raised to expect as normal. The minstrels seem poorly trained, Eddie observes during a particularly complex musical performance, his voice carrying clearly across the hall. Their harmony is imprecise, and their choice of songs lacks sophistication. The musicians, skilled professionals who have traveled extensively to perfect their craft, exchange glances that suggest they're accustomed to criticism from audiences who confuse familiarity with expertise. You find yourself caught between admiration for the evening's entertainment and concern about Eddie's behavior. The meal represents the collaborative effort of dozens of skilled professionals, from the kitchen staff who prepared the food to the musicians who provide artistic enhancement. Eddie's casual dismissal of their efforts reveals the same lack of empathy that characterized his afternoon's performance, suggesting that the evening's educational intervention had little lasting impact. The dinner's climax arrives with an elaborate dessert course featuring sugar sculptures and candied fruits arranged in artistic displays that represent weeks of skilled preparation. Eddie examines the presentation with the same critical eye he's applied to every previous course, and you can see him preparing to deliver another dismissive judgment. The moment feels like a test of everything he supposedly learned about leadership, empathy, and respect for others' contributions. "I suppose this is adequate for a provincial castle," Eddie says, his tone carrying the casual cruelty of someone who's never considered the human cost of his words. "Though I've certainly seen more impressive displays in more sophisticated courts." The comment strikes the assembled guests like a physical blow, transforming the evening's celebration into an uncomfortable reminder of social hierarchies and royal privilege. The great hall's atmosphere shifts as nobles, servants, and entertainers process the implications of Eddie's assessment. The carefully orchestrated dinner has become a demonstration of royal ingratitude rather than sophisticated hospitality, with you sitting beside the cause of this social disaster while knowing that its consequences will soon be visited upon your already tender back. The evening's lessons in empathy and leadership have apparently made no impression whatsoever. Master Aldrich's expression from across the hall confirms your suspicions about the evening's trajectory. His careful observation of Eddie's performance has clearly led to conclusions that will require additional educational intervention. The slight tightening around his eyes and the way he's begun to calculate something in his head suggest that the night's lessons are far from over, and that your role as educational demonstration is about to become painfully relevant once again. The royal chamber feels heavy with unspoken tension as you follow Eddie through the elaborate ritual of preparing for sleep. The room glows with candlelight that casts dancing shadows across the rich tapestries, creating an atmosphere that should be peaceful, but instead feels charged with the day's accumulated disappointments. Eddie's behavior during dinner has created a situation that will require resolution before morning, and you can sense Master Aldrich's presence in the corridor outside, waiting for the appropriate moment to address the evening's educational failures. Eddie moves through his nightly routine with the practiced efficiency of someone who's been pampered by servants his entire life. The elaborate process involves changing into sleeping garments, washing with scented water, and saying prayers that acknowledge his privileged position while theoretically instilling humility. You assist with the various tasks, your movements careful and measured as you try to assess his mood and predict how the evening's reckoning will unfold. "I don't understand why everyone seemed so sensitive tonight," Eddie says, as you help him remove his formal doublet, his tone carrying the particular brand of obliviousness that you've learned to recognize as dangerous. Honest assessment of quality should be appreciated, not treated as some kind of personal attack. The comment reveals his complete failure to understand the human impact of his criticism, suggesting that the day's lessons have made no lasting impression. The nightly routine provides a strange intimacy that contrasts sharply with the public nature of your daytime interactions. In the privacy of his chamber, Eddie sometimes shows glimpses of genuine humanity, moments of uncertainty, vulnerability, or even remorse that never appear in public settings. Tonight, however, His behavior suggests that he's genuinely puzzled by others' reactions to his criticism, rather than troubled by the pain he's caused. Perhaps, you suggest carefully, the kitchen staff and entertainers interpreted your comments as criticism of their professional skills rather than simple observations about quality. The diplomatic phrasing offers him an opportunity to recognize the human dimension of his behavior without directly challenging his actions. Your survival depends on your ability to guide him toward better choices without appearing to contradict his judgment. Eddie's response reveals both his intellectual limitations and his emotional immaturity. Their reaction suggests that they're not accustomed to honest feedback, he says, apparently convinced that his rudeness represented constructive criticism rather than thoughtless cruelty. Perhaps more direct communication would help them improve their performance. The suggestion demonstrates his complete inability to recognize the difference between helpful guidance and public humiliation. The chamber's peaceful atmosphere is interrupted by a soft knock at the door, followed by Master Aldrich's voice requesting permission to enter. Eddie's expression shifts from relaxed to annoyed as he realizes that his evening's performance is about to be subjected to scholarly analysis. The tutor's presence at this hour suggests that the day's educational shortcomings require immediate attention rather than waiting for tomorrow's formal lessons. Your Highness, Master Aldrich says, entering with the careful diplomacy of someone who's about to deliver unwelcome news. I believe this evening's dinner conversation requires some discussion before we conclude the day's instruction. His tone carries the weight of someone who's witnessed every diplomatic failure and missed opportunity, and his expression suggests that the discussion will be more practical than theoretical. The night preparation ritual transforms into an impromptu seminar on leadership, empathy, and the responsibilities of power. Master Aldrich systematically reviews Eddie's behavior during dinner, highlighting the gap between his theoretical knowledge and practical application. The academic exercise reveals the persistent patterns of thoughtlessness that have characterized his entire day, from the morning's breakfast complaints to the evening's dinner criticisms. A ruler's words carry weight beyond their immediate meaning, Master Aldrich explains, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone who's repeated this lesson many times before. When you criticize the work of skilled professionals in public, you're not providing helpful feedback, you're demonstrating disrespect for their expertise and undermining their authority with others. The lesson addresses the specific behaviors that created tonight's uncomfortable atmosphere. Eddie's response reveals his continued inability to grasp the human implications of his actions. But surely maintaining standards requires honest assessment, he asks, as if public humiliation were a necessary component of quality control. If I don't point out deficiencies, how will they know to improve? The question demonstrates his fundamental misunderstanding of leadership principles and human psychology. Historians still argue whether the medieval emphasis on royal prerogative actually prepared princes for effective leadership, or simply created elaborate justifications for selfish behavior. The combination of unlimited privilege with limited accountability may have produced rulers who were technically educated but emotionally stunted, capable of reciting leadership principles while completely failing to understand their practical application. There is a significant difference between providing constructive feedback and delivering public criticism. Master Aldrich continues, his patience showing signs of strain. A wise leader addresses quality concerns privately with those responsible, offering specific suggestions for improvement rather than general dismissal of their efforts. Your approach tonight demonstrated contempt rather than leadership. The lesson is becoming more pointed, and you sense that consequences are approaching. The chamber's candlelit atmosphere suddenly feels more ominous as Master Aldrich's expression hardens. Your behavior today has shown a consistent pattern of insensitivity to others' feelings and failure to recognize the human impact of your words and actions, he says quietly, moving toward the door where he's left his educational materials. This represents a serious character flaw that requires immediate correction. The evening's lesson is about to become painfully personal. You watch with familiar dread as Master Aldrich retrieves a heavy leather belt from his collection, testing its weight with the practiced motion of someone who's performed this routine countless times. The sight sends a chill through your recently punished back, and you steel yourself for another round of educational consequences. Eddie's thoughtlessness is about to become your physical reality, creating yet another example of the disconnect between actions and consequences that defines your existence. 15 strokes, Master Aldrich announces, for public disrespect of skilled professionals, failure to recognize the human impact of criticism, and persistent demonstration of character flaws despite repeated instruction. The formal pronouncement transforms Eddie's behavioral failures into a specific curriculum that will be written across your back in lines of fire. The night's lesson is about to become unforgettably educational. The great hall stands nearly empty in the pre-dawn darkness, with only the dying embers in the massive fireplaces providing scattered pools of orange light across the stone floor. Your back throbs with the memory of last night's 15 strokes, each movement sending sharp reminders of Eddie's continued failure to learn empathy through your suffering. The castle sleeps around you, but rest has been elusive. The combination of physical discomfort and psychological exhaustion has driven you to seek solace in these quiet moments when the complex dynamics of your position fade into blessed simplicity. Move carefully through the hall, your bare feet silent on the cold stone as you make your way to the kitchens in search of something to ease both your burning back and your troubled mind. The pre-dawn hours represent the only time when you can exist as simply yourself, rather than as an extension of Eddie's education, though even these stolen moments carry the weight of your impossible position. The castle's sleeping silence offers a temporary respite from the constant navigation required to survive as a whipping boy. The kitchen hearth still glows with banked coals, and you find a pitcher of small ale left from the evening service. The liquid is cool and slightly sweet, providing relief for your parched throat and a moment of simple pleasure that costs nothing and hurts no one. You settle onto a wooden stool beside the dying fire, allowing yourself the luxury of existing without purpose or performance, just a tired young man trying to make sense of his strange circumstances. Margaret, the head cook, emerges from the pantry carrying ingredients for the morning's bread, her movements efficient despite the early hour. She pauses when she sees you, her expression shifting from surprise to something that might be sympathy as she notices your careful posture and the way you hold yourself to minimize contact with the stool's back. "Can't sleep?" she asks, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who spent decades caring for others through food and comfort. "The night seems longer than usual," you reply, offering the diplomatic non-answer that you've learned keeps conversation safe while revealing nothing about your actual feelings. Margaret nods with the understanding of someone who's witnessed the castle's power dynamics for decades, and she moves to the herb cupboard with purposeful determination. The kitchen represents one of the few spaces where genuine human kindness exists without political calculation. "This might help," she says, preparing a tisane from dried herbs that smell of chamomile and willow bark. "My grandmother's recipe for when the body needs rest, but the mind won't quiet." The simple gesture of care feels profound after a day of being treated as an educational tool rather than a human being. Margaret's kindness carries no agenda beyond basic human compassion, a rare commodity in the castle's complex social environment. You sip the herbal tea gratefully, feeling its warmth spread through your chest, and its subtle bitterness provide a counterpoint to the sweetness of the ale. The combination creates a moment of perfect simplicity that stands in stark contrast to the elaborate protocols and power games that define your daily existence. Margaret works quietly nearby, beginning the daily ritual of bread making that will feed the castle's inhabitants, her movements carrying the peaceful rhythm of meaningful work. "The young prince has much to learn," Margaret observes carefully, her words chosen to acknowledge your situation without directly criticizing royal behavior. "Some lessons take longer than others to take root." The comment offers both sympathy for your position and hope that Eddie's education might eventually produce positive results, though your recent experiences suggest that optimism may be misplaced. The pre-dawn quiet allows for reflection on the strange psychology of your position. You've become intimately familiar with the consequences of Eddie's actions, while he remains insulated from their impact. The system creates a bizarre dynamic where you understand the cost of poor behavior better than the person whose behavior is being corrected. The educational theory behind whipping boys assumes that princes will modify their actions to protect their friends, but the reality proves more complex. Historians still argue whether the practice of using whipping boys actually modified royal behavior or simply created elaborate justifications for allowing privileged children to avoid consequences. Some evidence suggests that genuine friendships between princes and their whipping boys did produce behavioral improvements, while other cases show that the arrangement simply provided convenient scapegoats for royal misconduct. "Do you think he'll ever truly understand?" you ask Margaret, surprising yourself with the directness of the question. The pre-dawn intimacy of the kitchen has created a space where honesty feels possible, though you immediately regret the breach of proper diplomatic reserve. Margaret pauses in her kneading, considering the question with the serious attention it deserves. Understanding comes in many forms, she replies thoughtfully, her hands working the dough with practiced efficiency. Some people learn through experience, others through observation, and a few through the suffering of those they care about. The prince may yet surprise you, though the path to wisdom is often longer than we hope. Her words offer cautious optimism while acknowledging the reality of your current situation. The kitchen's warm atmosphere provides a sanctuary from the castle's political complexities, where a tired young man can share honest conversation with someone who understands the cost of serving difficult masters. Margaret's presence offers both practical comfort and emotional support, reminding you that genuine human connection exists even within the artificial constraints of castle life. The simple act of being treated as a person rather than a tool feels like a profound gift. As the first hints of dawn begin to lighten the kitchen's small windows, you know that your stolen moment of peace is drawing to close. Soon the castle will wake, Eddie will require your presence, and the complex dance of education and punishment will resume. But for now, you can sit quietly beside the dying fire, drinking herb tea, and remembering that beneath the elaborate protocols and power games, you remain fundamentally human. The herbs begin to take effect, easing both the physical discomfort in your back and the emotional tension that has become your constant companion. Margaret's kindness has provided more than just temporary relief. It has reminded you that compassion exists within the castle's walls, even if it's often hidden beneath layers of social convention and political necessity. The moment feels like a small victory against the dehumanizing aspects of your position. The day will begin soon, Margaret observes, checking the lightening sky through the window. But remember that each dawn brings new possibilities, even when the circumstances seem unchanged. Her words carry the wisdom of someone who's learned to find hope within difficult situations, and they provide a framework for approaching another day as Eddie's whipping boy, with dignity and resilience intact. The narrow bed in your servant's quarters feels simultaneously too soft and too hard as you finally settle into an uneasy rest, your body finding comfortable positions despite the network of welts decorating your back. The pre-dawn conversation with Margaret has left you feeling both more human and more isolated, reminded of your essential humanity, while simultaneously aware of how the castle's systems work to obscure it. The sounds of the awakening castle drift through your small window. Servants beginning their morning routines, guards changing shifts, and the general stirring that accompanies the start of another day in this elaborate theater of power and privilege. Your mind refuses to quiet despite your body's desperate need for rest. The day's events replay in an endless loop of small humiliations and larger injustices, each memory triggering fresh waves of physical and emotional discomfort. Eddie's behavior at breakfast, the afternoon's assembly, the evening's dinner criticism, each incident represents not just a failure of his education, but a preview of the kind of ruler he might become. The thought fills you with with a mixture of concern for the kingdom's future and selfish worry about your own survival in this impossible position. The psychological complexity of your situation creates a strange form of insomnia where exhaustion battles with anxiety, leaving you caught between the need for rest and the inability to find peace. You're intimately familiar with the consequences of Eddie's actions, while he remains blissfully unaware of their impact. The educational theory suggests that watching your punishment should motivate him to better behavior, but the reality proves more complicated than the scholars anticipated. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by the ache in your back and the weight of tomorrow's uncertainties. Your dreams, when they arrive, are populated by endless corridors where you search for exits that don't exist, classrooms where the lessons never end, and dining halls where criticism flows like wine while consequences fall like rain. The subconscious mind processes the day's stresses through symbolic narratives that feel both foreign and familiar, creating a rest that refreshes the body while troubling the spirit. The castle's night sounds provide a strange lullaby. The distant call of guards making their rounds, the settling of ancient stones cooling in the darkness, and the soft susurrus of wind through the narrow windows. These familiar sounds should be comforting, but they also serve as reminders of your confinement within this elaborate system of privilege and punishment. Even in sleep, you cannot fully escape the awareness of your precarious position. Historians still argue whether the medieval practice of using whipping boys represented genuine educational innovation or simply provided convenient justification for royal privilege. The system's complexity suggests that it served multiple functions simultaneously, protecting the sacred nature of royal persons, providing consequences for poor behavior, and creating emotional bonds designed to encourage better choices. Whether these functions actually worked as intended remains a matter of scholarly debate. Your fitful rest is interrupted by dreams of alternative lives, scenarios where you might have remained in your family's minor noble household, learned a trade, or found some other path that didn't involve absorbing punishment for someone else's mistakes. These dreams feel both liberating and painful, offering glimpses of possibilities that your current circumstances have made impossible. The contrast between dream freedom and waking reality creates its own form of psychological torment. The pre-dawn hours stretch endlessly as your body seeks rest while your mind refuses to quiet. The physical discomfort of your recent beating mingles with the emotional exhaustion of navigating the castle's complex social dynamics, creating a state of restless alertness that defeats the purpose of sleep. You find yourself calculating the hours until dawn, when the cycle will begin again with whatever mood Eddie brings to the new day. Margaret's herbal tea has helped somewhat, its calming properties providing a buffer against the worst of your anxiety, while its physical effects ease the burning sensation across your back. The simple kindness of her gesture feels disproportionately significant in the context of your isolated position, reminding you that human compassion exists even within the castle's elaborate systems of power and control. The memory of her gentle words provides a small island of comfort in the sea of uncertainty. As the first hints of dawn begin to lighten the darkness beyond your window, you finally drift into deeper sleep, your exhausted body overcoming your troubled mind's resistance to rest. The sleep that comes is heavy and dreamless, providing the physical restoration you need while offering temporary escape from the psychological complexities of your position. Your breathing deepens, your muscles relax, and for a few precious hours, you exist simply as a sleeping human being rather than as an instrument of royal education. The morning will bring new challenges, fresh opportunities for Eddie to demonstrate his continued failure to learn empathy through your suffering, and additional lessons in the complex dynamics of power, privilege, and consequence. But for now, in these stolen hours of rest, you can simply be yourself, a young man trying to survive an impossible situation with dignity and humanity intact. The castle sleeps around you now, its ancient stones holding centuries of similar stories, young men who found themselves caught between privilege and punishment, learning and suffering, hope and despair. Your breathing grows slower, deeper, as the herb tea's gentle chemistry works its quiet magic through your system. The ache in your back fades to a distant throb, no longer the sharp reminder of injustice, but simply another sensation in the vast catalog of human experience. Sleep comes finally, not as escape, but as acceptance, a recognition that this strange life you've been given has its own peculiar dignity. You're not just a victim of an unfair system, but a participant in the complex dance of power and consequence that shapes kingdoms and defines characters. Your suffering serves a purpose, even if that purpose remains opaque to those who benefit from it most. The darkness deepens, and with it comes the profound quiet that settles over castles in the deep hours before dawn. Your mind releases its grip on the day's events, allowing them to settle into memory where they'll be processed and understood in ways that conscious thought cannot accomplish. The body's wisdom takes over, healing what can be healed, strengthening what must endure, and preparing for whatever tomorrow might bring. In your dreams, you walk through sunlit meadows where consequences and privileges don't exist, where kindness flows freely, and pain serves no educational purpose. These dreams feel real in ways that your waking life sometimes doesn't, offering glimpses of worlds where justice and mercy dance together in perfect harmony. The castle's stone walls fade away, replaced by open skies and endless possibilities. Rest comes at last, deep and dreamless, carrying you through the remaining hours of darkness toward whatever dawn awaits. The whipping boy sleeps, and in sleeping, finds the peace that daylight too often denies.